all. Thank you all so much for coming today. My name is Kathleen Gallagher Jones, and I'm John and Wendy's youngest daughter. Father Bala has graciously allowed me to spend a few minutes before Mass concludes to say a few words about my dad. And my sister will also share some words about my dad at the reception following Mass. And that's when anyone else who would like to say some words as well, you're welcome to do so. My dad's story starts in early March of 1938. The Anaheim River had flooded due to record-setting rain. As water reached my grandparents' windowsills, Geraldine Dolan Gallagher, then 8.5 months pregnant, climbed up a ladder to reach the roof of their house, where her husband Steve pitched a tent for Jerry, Steve, and their 2 children, Edward and Louise. My grandmother wrote, "I took bread, crackers, water, and a bottle of wine, just in case I might have my baby." She then asked her fellow neighbors if anyone knew how to deliver a baby. They said a prayer and hoped for the best. 2 weeks later, my dad, nicknamed the Flood Baby, was born in a hospital in Anaheim, California. John's father practiced law in Anaheim, but he was a gentleman farmer at heart. When John was 7, my grandparents moved their young family to a farmhouse in Garden Grove, surrounded by 7.5 acres of orange trees. The years my dad spent living in that farmhouse, playing and exploring with his brothers Eddie and Bobby and his sister Louise, were some of the happiest years of his childhood. In the orange groves, John discovered the joys of the outdoors, animal life, and a creative imagination. My dad would relay stories of the numerous clubs he and his siblings started, each with a variety of qualifications for membership. The most infamous club was the Jealous John Club, started by my Aunt Louise. In addition to various clubs, my dad told stories of BB gun fights with his brother Bobby, where they'd take their loaded BB guns to the orange grove, pace off, then turn and fire at each other until they ran out of ammunition. My dad talked of fruit fights, tree houses, vegetable gardens, the smell of orange blossoms, water flowing through the irrigation channels, exploring and observing animal life, the sounds of frogs and crickets on a summer night, and the taste of fresh squeezed orange juice. These were memories of a way of life John would always treasure. John attended St. Boniface School and church, where he was an altar boy. One Sunday, while John and his friend Michael Staley were serving Mass, he and Michael accidentally started a fire in the sacristy while playing with matches and incense. John recalled the flames quickly spreading to the long velvet drapes, so he quietly interrupted the priest saying Mass to tell him, "Father, the sacristy is on fire." To which the priest replied in a quiet voice, "John, can you boys handle it?" My dad always laughed at the thought of a priest asking 2 young, scared altar boys if they could handle the back of a church on fire. He was also proud to tell the story of standing in the cloakroom at school when his teacher, also a nun, told him to take his coat off and sit down. John replied, "But baby, it's cold outside." To which the shocked nun responded with a slap to the face. From a young age, my dad loved to make people laugh, even if it meant taking a risk. John attended Mater Dei High School, where he played on the varsity golf team. John's grandfather Dolan taught John and his cousin, Johnny Bastian, who's here, to play golf. The 2 cousins often played with grandfather Dolan and Uncle Phil, from boyhood to manhood. John continued to love and play golf for decades to come with family and dear friends, but he told his mother he never enjoyed the game of golf as much as he did with his grandfather Dolan, his uncle, and his cousin on Saturdays. He spent high school summers working as a lifeguard at the local community pool or working for the Parks and Rec Department. John attended Loyola Marymount University, where he majored in sociology, played rugby, and was active in his fraternity. He then went on to study law at the University of Southern California. It was during law school that John went on a blind date and met Wendy, his wife of nearly 60 years. Their courtship came to a turning point. I found out this morning it was on her birthday, the night Wendy complained about why were they not engaged yet. As my dad told it, he said, "Why don't you stop talking and put out your fat little finger?" He placed the ring on her finger and they were engaged. John then graduated from law school. They married on June 22nd, 1963, and 9 months later, my brother Stephen was born. John worked for the Anaheim City Attorney's Office and later joined his father's law practice, during which time my sister Mary Beth was born. But my dad was a pioneer. And think he liked working for his father or working on Saturdays. So in 1967, he applied for and took a job in the Sonoma County District Attorney's Office as Deputy DA, during which time I was born. He was later appointed Assistant District Attorney in 1972. Then in 1976, with the encouragement and support of his wife and close friends, he ran for Superior Court Judge and won. My dad loved being a judge. He loved to take command of the courtroom. He loved to tease the attorneys. He loved taking his family to the Sonoma County Fair on free passes and kibitzing with the sheriff's deputies and the police officers who'd call out, "Hey, Judge." He'd stop and talk to the deputies and officers somewhere between the funnel cake booth and the Hall of Flowers and introduce them to his family. My dad was proud of these relationships. That was the life of a judge in a small town in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. I think my dad loved the attention and feeling like a big deal, but more importantly, he loved the relationships and the connections he made as a judge. But the most important relationship from my dad was my mom. She was his campaign manager when he ran for election, and she spent countless hours ringing doorbells and walking precincts to tell people about my dad and why he made a good judge. They were hiking and horseback riding buddies, and they had matching powder blue tent speeds. They took vacations together, just the two of them, to keep their relationship strong. Through good times and bad, they stuck together for nearly 60 years, with my mom as his caregiver for the last 5+ years of my dad's life. My dad was lucky to have my loyal, loving, and forgiving mom as his partner. Both of my parents appreciated anything Western and anything to do with the country. So shortly after my dad was elected to the bench, my parents built our family home on 5 acres in the foothills of Santa Rosa. My dad called it God's country whenever my grandfather came to visit, who thought Southern California was God's country. Some of you are here today. I think it was my dad's version of the farmhouse amongst the orange groves that he loved as a child. He and my mom planted fruit trees, a garden, raised animals, and loved their life in the country. My dad really was a gentleman farmer at heart and would take me on drives to visit the ranchers down the road or Carter's Feeds just to talk shop. One spring, my dad bought me 2 lambs, but I was in high school and I was beginning to lose interest. And unfortunately, Macy's was having a White Flower Day sale. I ended up selling the lambs back to my dad for $100. And if that wasn't bad enough, my grandfather Gallagher was visiting at the time, and he called me Judas for the remainder of his stay. But my dad never made me feel bad about the transaction. He loved a good sale just as much as the next person. And if you knew my dad, he loved clothes. He loved clothes. And even though I think he really loved having those lambs, my dad never wanted to do or say anything that might make you feel you had disappointed him. My dad would do just about anything for his kids. He was famous for racing down to the bank on a Friday afternoon when we were in college to put $100 in our accounts before the weekend when we call and say we were out of money. He'd remind us that the tellers at the Exchange Bank on 4th Street frequently asked him if he would adopt them. He was also a big proponent of walking around money. Later in life, when he'd visit his grandchildren, as the visit was coming to a close, he'd duck around a corner and begin counting how much cash he had in his wallet. He started with $5 and progressed to 20 or more as the grandkids got older and better at coming up with reasons why they might need more money. Like earning good grades on a report card or some upcoming purchase they were saving for. My dad called it, I repeat myself, walking around money, because it was good to have some money in your pocket just in case. When his kids or grandkids got jobs, he'd want to know how much money they were earning. He'd then respond with, "Oh, big monies," and want to know what you'd be getting him for Christmas that year. My siblings and I enjoyed doing things with my dad on the weekends. We loved going to the courthouse with him. I mean, it was the Hall of Justice. Superman hung out there. We'd patiently play in the courtroom, sit at his desk, AKA the bench, and I'd write him little notes that he might find during court. I was so proud of him. A weekend trip to the dump was a huge event. Not only did we get to pull things out of the back of first green, then red, then finally silver station wagon, but we got to throw stuff over the side into the giant pit that was the dump. It was a long drive out to the dump, somewhere past Sonoma, I think. And on the way back, as a reward for helping, my dad would stop at the Foster's Freeze on 4th Street for a Frosty. He'd play music and talk to us, pointing out the giant eucalyptus trees, or the green hills, or whatever he thought was beautiful along the way, as we drove the back roads of the county that he loved. As my siblings and I grew up and moved away, my dad continued to tend his portion of God's country with the help of my mom. I think seeing the results of his hard work and the beauty of those 5 acres year after year must have given him a sense of permanence that felt good. My siblings and I would come home for a visit and later bring our own children, and he'd take us out to look at his fruit trees. He'd encourage us to take a paper bag to pick apples or plums or whatever happened to be ripe at the time so we could take it home. I think that must have felt for him like he was sending a small part of himself